On one nation under Google, Google Palestine and Twitter, everything.
That's true.
How the story of the Palestine conflict, when you were growing up in India, how is it told there? Because India has a problem also with Pakistan, Kashmir, Does it really have an effect? How the Indians read it?
Well, historically, India has always had a pro-Palestine stance, because of India's history with colonialism and colonial resistance. India has had a very strong pro-Palestine stance. For the longest amount of time, actually, anybody with an Indian passport was barred from even traveling to Israel. But this changed over the last decade and a half as India's economy grew, as it became sort of a global power, so to speak, and its relationship with Israel strengthened. And now India is Israel's largest, one of the largest military buyers from Israel. So, it's very sad to see sort of a country that has had its own colonial history sort of in many ways like renege on that and side in many ways with and economically trade with what is a colonial, a historically colonial oppression,
So the conflict between Israel and Palestine, you put it in the paradigm or the prism of colonialism, not some people say religion, some people say history, some people say.
I think that's a really good question because
white European,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one way to look at it is actually going back to the 2005 BDS call, the call by Palestinian civil society to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel until Israel complies with international law. They identify the oppression of the Palestinians as a tripartite structure of oppression. One, historical colonialism stemming from Nakba, the catastrophe in 1948 when Palestinians were driven out of their land. Two, it is occupation, the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza that is manifested through the apartheid wall, through an enormous military presence in that area. That was one of the examples of which was the brutal siege of Gaza last year. And three is the apartheid-like treatment of Palestinian citizens in the national territory of Israel, as well as Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza. So it's important to look at this form of oppression as not just occupation or apartheid or colonial thing, but like a combination of these three structures of oppression that Palestinians very bravely are struggling against and fighting and resisting, and for the most part extremely non-violently as manifested by calls like the BDS.
Sylvia, you heard Dr. Abu Aisha last night, and it seems like he has a tragic story, losing three of his daughters in one strike.
Yeah.
And he still believes in peace, and he thinks that we need to recognize each other as human, that the land, a house can incorporate, when I interviewed him, a house can incorporate 400 loving people, but not two fighters. What do you think of his brand, firebrand of peace? That resonates to what's going on here?
Well, I believe in peace too, and I believe in peaceful movement towards a common goal. But and he did not, as far as I heard, he did not put forward any kind of political agenda. He thinks that reconciliation is possible.
And that will work itself out.
Well, not alone, it won't. I mean, that's very good of him, and I.
Is he naive? Is he too optimistic, or he is? I understand when you have this personal trauma, you come up with something to compensate the grief that you go through. Something very idealistic like this.
Well, it could be. There's a group on I think it's based in Israel called. What's it called? Breaking the Peace? Or
are you talking about the boycott from within? Or?
No. It's a group of parents who have lost children, Palestinian parents and Israeli parents.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
And they go through the same things.
So the analogy of apartheid, in Israel with what happened in South Africa. They stayed there for 300 years. Do you expect that much? Do people get it? And I have 1 minute here. Give me your last assessment.
The analogy of like apartheid with South Africa. I mean, I think that it's important to understand. I mean, this is not even us just sort of saying that, like, you know, there's an apartheid situation.
We're not exaggerating.
You know, we're not exaggerating, exactly. And this is, I mean, a study was conducted in South Africa examining the conditions that Palestinians go through, and they found significant overlaps with the kind of apartheid situation in South Africa that black South Africans were going through under the apartheid regime. And so then one has to, like, take that into account. Are there differences? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But there are also very strong similarities. And I'd like to add that this actually, like, scares the Israeli state a lot, because it changes the paradigm of the debate. It changes the paradigm of the debate, and it showcases that those of us who are on the side of peace and justice have the moral high ground. Because,
and to make American can relate to that argument, to that debate.
Absolutely.
I mean, in that paradigm. I want to give Sylvia 10 seconds. Tell us your view of anti-Zionism and all that. How widespread is in the Jewish community here in the United States?
I think it's a very small movement, but it's growing. And I think that people who believe, as I do, that Zionism is a colonial system and not a religion, that we feel betrayed by Zionists.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to introduce the next, and this is what event last night, and we went to, and we were bosses. We went to and listen to Dr. Izzeddin Abu Aisha, and he talks about the new brand of peace. And please, here is the interview with Dr. Izzeddin Abu Aisha. Assalamu alaikum, and God bless you all.